you guys going to introduce this, and do you want to have it in place, before 2012, or before the November election? Or what's your timeline here?
Sure. Well, it's being drafted, and we're close to having it ready for introduction. We just wanted to make sure that we were out there talking about our common sense proposals and our willingness to work with Republicans on meaningful election reform. There are some reforms that are needed before the 2012 election. We don't want to get into a situation where we're making changes right up to the last minute, but we're still in January of 2012. There's still time to make sure our voter registration process is voter friendly and in compliance with federal law. We don't want to have the high number of provisional ballots that we have in every election. There's easy fixes that we can make that we can put into place before 2012, and we would like to see those changes before that, what will be, I'm sure, a huge election.
You haven't said anything about the Golden Week. Is there a general consensus here to shorten the absentee ballot window to get rid of that overlap?
We are not interested in shortening the absentee ballot, the absentee voting process. We'd like to see, it's been a very popular thing for voters. We have, I think, a little over 30% of voters in the state voting absentee, early in person and by mail. And we'd like to see that 35-day window continue, because we think that allows the most time for people to participate, especially with the mail-in process. Sometimes it takes a while to get your application in, get your ballot back, get it mailed back in, and we feel that the 35-day window is a good window for Ohio.
Does that mean you want to preserve the Golden Week? Even Jennifer Berner conceded that we could probably get rid of that.
Keeping the 35-day window does keep the opportunity for same-day registration. I think that generally we support same-day registration, and even extending same-day registration rather than eliminating it. I think that the 5-day period, overlap period, has shown that there isn't a widespread problem with allowing same-day voter registration. So I think it's a good experiment that shows that works for Ohio voters, and maybe that's something that we should think about expanding rather than eliminating.
When did you start work on drafting this proposal? Has this just come up in the last couple of days with Secretary Houston's comments, or has it been ongoing?
Well, yeah, sure.
This has been a working process or in progress since the last General Assembly. I don't know if you remember, we had Senate Bill 8, House Bill 260, coming out of the Senate and the House, and ultimately had a work group of not just legislative members, but representatives from boards of elections around the state, the Secretary of State's office, election official, people who have experience specifically in that area, League of Women Voters, all came together to see how we could bring and merge the two bills together and have some bipartisan consensus on something. And we probably got about 90% there, and literally just ran out of time before we were able to finalize it and put it before our respective caucuses and put it on the floor in our chambers. And coming back in this General Assembly and understanding we were going to address it again, there was great disappointment that we did not at least start with the points that we had already achieved consensus on. Instead, everything was thrown out, and it went back to a very extreme partisan position. And in 194, when you look, it is very much a political document, because when you look at who's disenfranchised by that, it's young people, old people, poor people, minorities, all demographics that traditionally the greater population, a greater percentage of those demographic populations support Democratic candidates. So we're hoping that we can get back to a more neutral posture, and if we're going to revisit this again, that we would be allowed to be at the table this time. Much of what we presented to you today is not new. We're just building upon things that we already had agreed upon.
Are there any parts of House Bill 194 included in this bill?
Looks like the pooling might be.
Some of the help for the local election officials that we've briefly outlined, we'd like to maintain in the bill to make it easier and more cost effective for them to run elections. Originally, online registration was part of the 194 debate and was taken, stripped out at the last minute. So that is something that we agree with Secretary Houston when he originally proposed it, and would like to see that reform for Ohio voters. One thing I do want to add to the previous question is how much work Representative Reece has done on the provisional ballot issue. We've been working on that since January of last year. So I think that it's no surprise where we stand on wanting to fix a serious problem in Ohio elections, and this bill will continue our effort to do that.
And the points that Representative Clyde pointed out in terms of the cost savings, the resource pooling, et cetera, that was part of the discussion that we had on the floor, because some of the pushback came from counties that were more rural, smaller, had smaller funding in their boards of election, and were concerned about rising to the standard of, say, a Franklin County. And what we were looking to try to do was create opportunities where there could be a leveling of the playing field, but that would raise all boats instead of, taking us all down to the lowest common denominator, to try and get more of our counties up to where Franklin County was, because Franklin County has been kind of identified as, a standard in terms of being a progressive county in terms of boards of elections and how we've been functioning here. And those are some of the things that you'll see incorporated in this, so that those that had not gotten that far, can come up to the standard that we have. That's our desire for all voters in Ohio.
A lot of the previous election reform bills have included satellite locations for absentee voting. Why do you not have that in here?
Well, part of what we've done is lay out, and it's pretty comprehensive, a proposal of many of the areas we'd like to see. But I think we would definitely be open to considering increasing the number of locations for early in-person absentee voting.
In terms of the college ID passport provision you guys have here, if you're a college student, maybe you're in from out of state, do you have any concern that that student might be voting in two places for president, or how would they, if you're a college student, how would you show that ID? Would you have to bring in a bill at least?
Well, the student would still have to be registered to vote and would have to meet the requirements during the voter registration process of declaring their residence in the state and declaring their eligibility to vote in Ohio, and thereby relinquishing their eligibility to vote in another state if they even were registered in another state. Oftentimes people first register to vote when they get to college. So that, possible concern would be taken care of during the voter registration process, and then they could use their student ID when they show up at the polls, much like many other states that already allow student IDs to be used for voting.
Is there one of the arguments against using these two forms of IDs that it doesn't have a current address?
Right, but in Ohio, currently, your driver's license doesn't have to have a current address on it. And you see a lot of young voters, whether they're college students or not, and some of our lower income voters as well, who move a lot. So often, I think you have to purchase a new driver's license every 6 years, or 4 or 6 years. And many young voters move many times before purchasing that new ID. So we already have the requirement that you don't have to have a current address on your driver's license. And I think it makes sense to expand the list of eligible ID to encourage more voting, especially with our young people, and getting them involved in the process.
Is that thinking with the passport as well? That doesn't have an address on it.
That's exactly right, and neither does a military ID, which we currently allow to be showed at the polling place. So expanding the list of eligible IDs, I think that there's a lot of hoops you go through to get a passport. Most people show up if they have a passport and are baffled that they're not able to use that form of ID. So again, this is kind of a common sense, voter friendly update to the law.
Can I add to that too? When I was a college student, I was at Grand One State University in Louisiana, and they allowed college ID. And I moved my voting there because that's where I was going to be for the next 4 years. And it worked out great. So I've seen it, I've participated, utilized it, and that was some years ago. So I think it's about time we catch up. But yeah, it worked.
What's to prevent them from repealing House Bill 194 and then replacing it with an almost an equal bill of their choosing? And what if that happens, what's up?
I think that is why we're here today. We're very concerned about the discussions that are going on. We're confident that voters will repeal 194 in November if it's on the ballot. If we decide to take it off the ballot, we want to make sure that there's a meaningful discussion about what a replacement bill should look like, and we want it to be as upfront and quick as possible, showing the work that we've done, what our priorities are, our willingness to work in a bipartisan fashion, because when we approach these election issues, we're seeing what happens when you don't work across the aisle on meaningful reform. So we're here to say we're ready to do that, and we don't want to see a thwarting of Ohio's right to referendum by taking one bill off the ballot and adding a very similar one or identical one later on in the legislature. I think that would be tragic, and we're here to try to prevent that and pledge our willingness to work with the Republicans.
And I think it would be ill received by the public as well, especially in light of how involved our citizens have been since issue 2 on Senate Bill 5. So I think people are paying attention much more in recent days than they have generally to what's happening here in the legislature, and it's because things have been so partisan. So I anticipate that, I would hope they would not do that, because there would be a huge outcry, not just from the legislature, but from the citizens.
And that's the reason we're here. We would not, I think, be at this point had it not been for the citizens speaking out. I mean, House Bill 194 was really rushed through very quickly. And so the only reason that we're even having this conversation now is because there is pushback from across the state by everyday citizens.
John Bustad yesterday said that he was concerned that a campaign against House Bill 194 simultaneously at the time people are going out and voting will create confusion as to actually which set of rules apply on election day. What sense are you getting out there in terms of whether or not voters really know at this point what's expected?
I think that a campaign could be mounted effectively to say this is a voter suppression legislation that needs to be defeated at the polls. I think that a presidential election in Ohio gets people's attention to voting issues and gets them participating, and I think that we would be able to educate them about the ballot issue. So I think voters know about this. Hundreds of thousands of them signed petitions. I thought it might be complicated to explain because it was such a big bill, but my constituents got it, and they want to see it go down.